Behind the laugh tracks and family-friendly sitcoms, 17 performers lived double lives, not by choice, but by necessity. Hollywood's morality clauses, studio control, and career-ending exposure meant one truth could erase decades of work. The question isn't why they hid. It's how they survived at all in an industry built on impossible standards. 1. Dick Sargent. Dick Sargent stepped into one of television's most iconic roles as the second Darren Stevens on Bewitched, but off-screen, he was playing an even more exhausting part. For decades, Sargent navigated an industry that would have blacklisted him instantly if the truth came out. Studios didn't just discourage openness, they weaponized fear. Contracts included morality clauses that could terminate careers overnight, and tabloids hunted for scandal like bloodhounds. Sargent watched friends lose everything, saw whispers destroy reputations, and knew the cost of visibility was too high. In 1991, after retiring from acting, he finally came out publicly, becoming one of the first actors of his generation to do so. He spent his remaining years advocating for LGBTQ+ rights and HIV/AIDS awareness, turning decades of silence into powerful activism. His courage arrived late, but it arrived loud. Sargent proved that even those who spent careers in hiding could still reshape the conversation. He died in 1994, but his legacy remains a bridge between Hollywood's darkest era and the progress that followed. 2. Paul Lynde. Paul Lynde's campy humor and razor-sharp wit made him a television icon, but his flamboyance existed in a dangerous space. Hollywood squares turned him into a household name, yet the same qualities that made him beloved also marked him as suspect in an era obsessed with traditional masculinity. Lynde never publicly acknowledged his sexuality, a silence born from calculated survival. Behind closed doors, he struggled with alcoholism and isolation, the weight of living split between public persona and private truth. Industry insiders knew, audiences speculated, but Lynde never confirmed. The unspoken agreement was simple: entertain us, but don't make us uncomfortable. He delivered one-liners that pushed boundaries without crossing them, a tightrope walk that required constant vigilance. Friends described a man haunted by what he couldn't say, someone whose humor masked profound loneliness. When he died suddenly in 1982, the tributes celebrated his comedy, but never acknowledged the cost of his silence. Lynde's career thrived in the margins, but those margins were suffocating. 3. Charles Nelson Reilly. Charles Nelson Reilly became a fixture of 1970s game shows, his theatrical personality and quick wit making him unforgettable on programs like Match Game. Yet his exaggerated mannerisms existed in a coded language that audiences understood but couldn't name. Reilly's flamboyance was entertainment, acceptable as long as it remained performance rather than identity. He never publicly discussed his personal life, navigating an entertainment landscape where visibility meant vulnerability. Behind the scenes, Reilly built a decades-long partnership with Broadway director Patrick Hughes, a relationship lived entirely in private. The entertainment industry allowed certain performers to be eccentric, as long as they never claimed space as openly LGBTQ+. Reilly's humor felt safe to mainstream audiences because it never challenged them directly. He walked a careful line, his personality celebrated as quirky rather than authentic. When he died in 2007, obituaries focused on his career accomplishments, largely avoiding discussions of his personal life, even in death. Reilly's story highlights how Hollywood created space for certain types of queer performance, while simultaneously policing actual queer lives. His contributions to comedy were significant, but they came at the cost of living truthfully in public. 4. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr constructed one of Hollywood's most elaborate false narratives, inventing dead wives and children to shield his private life from scrutiny. For decades, he spoke publicly about family tragedies that never occurred, building a heterosexual backstory that biographers would later expose as complete fiction. The desperation required to maintain such extensive lies reveals the terror that defined his era. Burr's partnership with actor Robert Benavides lasted over 30 years. Yet publicly, Benavides was introduced as a business associate. They built an orchid business together, traveled the world, and created a shared life entirely in shadows. Perry Mason made Burr one of television's highest-paid actors, but that success required constant performance off-screen. The fabricated stories weren't occasional white lies, but a comprehensive alternate biography he maintained until his death. When Burr died in 1993, the truth emerged gradually through biographies and investigative journalism. His deception wasn't pathological, but protective, a survival mechanism in an industry that destroyed careers for far less. 5. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson represented Hollywood's ultimate leading man, the romantic ideal that defined an entire generation of cinema. His transition to television with Macmillan and Wife in the 1970s extended his career. But behind the carefully constructed image lived someone in constant fear of exposure. Hudson's marriage to Phyllis Gates lasted barely 3 years, widely understood as a publicity arrangement designed to silence persistent rumors. Studio executives orchestrated his entire public persona, arranging dates with actresses and planting stories in fan magazines. His private relationships with men existed in complete secrecy, conducted with extreme caution. Hudson watched the McCarthy era destroy lives, saw friends blacklisted, and understood that visibility meant annihilation. When his AIDS diagnosis became public in 1985, it shattered decades of carefully maintained fiction and forced America to confront both the disease and his sexuality simultaneously. His death, weeks later, transformed public discourse around AIDS, lending mainstream visibility to a crisis the Reagan administration had ignored. Hudson's coming out was involuntary, driven by illness rather than choice, yet it catalyzed unprecedented conversation. 6. Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero's portrayal of the Joker in the 1960s Batman series cemented his place in pop culture, his theatrical villainy defining the character for generations. Yet his decades-long bachelor status fueled constant speculation that he navigated with practiced deflection. Romero attended premieres with glamorous actresses, performed the role of Latin lover convincingly, and never addressed persistent rumors. Hollywood insiders understood, but the public conversation remained speculation rather than acknowledgement. His career spanned from the 1930s through the 1980s, witnessing every shift in Hollywood's treatment of sexuality, yet never feeling safe enough to speak openly. Romero's charm became armor, his public persona carefully calibrated to suggest availability while revealing nothing. Friends described someone deeply private, protective of boundaries, in ways that suggested painful experience. When he died in 1994, obituaries celebrated his 6-decade career without addressing the questions that had followed him throughout. Romero's silence wasn't weakness, but strategy, a calculated choice in an industry that punished honesty. 7. Rory Calhoun. Rory Calhoun built his career on rugged Western roles, embodying traditional masculinity in shows like The Texan. His tough guy image seemed unshakable, yet behind it lived someone navigating constant fear of exposure. Hollywood's Western genre demanded specific masculine performance, and any deviation threatened not just individual careers, but entire production investments. Calhoun's private life remained carefully guarded, his relationships conducted in extreme secrecy. The Western genre's cultural significance made its stars particularly vulnerable, their images tied to American ideals of manhood that left no room for complexity. Confidential magazine and similar publications hunted for scandal, turning exposure into a profitable business model. Studios employed fixers to suppress stories, but the threat remained constant. Calhoun's career survived decades of speculation, but friends described the exhausting vigilance required to maintain his public image. When details of his personal life emerged after his death in 1999, they revealed someone who'd navigated impossible pressures throughout his career. 8. Will Geer. Will Geer's portrayal of Grandpa Walton embodied wholesome American values, making his private life's contrast particularly striking. In the 1930s, Geer had a relationship with Harry Hay, who would later found the Mattachine Society, one of America's first gay rights organizations. Geer eventually married actress Herta Ware, with whom he had 3 children, though he remained open with her about his sexuality. His leftist politics and activism got him blacklisted during the McCarthy era, forcing him to work in theater and found an outdoor venue to survive. When the Waltons revived his career in the 1970s, he'd already spent decades navigating industry persecution. Geer's activism extended beyond LGBTQ+ rights to labor organizing and civil rights, making him multiply vulnerable to conservative backlash. His personal relationships included both men and women throughout his life, though public discussion remained impossible during his career's peak. When he died in 1978, obituaries focused on his acting legacy, largely avoiding his political history and personal life. Geer's story reveals how political persecution intersected with sexual orientation discrimination, compounding the dangers facing outspoken performers. His resilience through blacklisting and his quiet advocacy helped lay groundwork for future activism. 9. Jim Nabors. Jim Nabors created one of television's most beloved characters with Gomer Pyle, his "Abu Shucks" persona defining wholesome American entertainment. Yet Nabors spent decades navigating rumors and speculation, his bachelor status and close friendship with Rock Hudson fueling persistent gossip. The entertainment industry's unwritten rules meant certain friendships attracted scrutiny, marking individuals as suspect by association. Nabors relocated to Hawaii in the 1970s, seeking distance from Hollywood's surveillance. He built a successful career performing in concerts and maintaining selective television appearances. But personal questions remained off-limits. The contrast between Gomer Pyle's innocent persona and the speculation surrounding Nabors created cognitive dissonance that audiences seemed content to ignore. In 2013, at age 82, Nabors married his partner of 38 years, Stan Cadwallader, 1 month after same-sex marriage became legal in Washington state. The announcement surprised many, though friends had known about the relationship for decades. Nabors' late-life visibility came only after legal protections existed and his career had long concluded. His story demonstrates how even beloved performers with seemingly secure positions lived in fear throughout their active careers. Nabors died in 2017, having spent only 4 years of his life able to publicly acknowledge his marriage. 10. Tony Randall. Tony Randall's portrayal of Felix Unger in The Odd Couple made him synonymous with fastidious sophistication, his refined mannerisms defining the character. Yet those same qualities fueled decades of speculation about his personal life, rumors he never addressed directly. Randall married twice, first to Florence Gibbs for 50 years until her death, then surprisingly to Heather Harlan, 50 years his junior, with whom he had 2 children in his 70s. The second marriage shocked many and prompted renewed speculation about his previous decades. Industry insiders debated whether his marriages represented genuine attraction or protective arrangements, though definitive answers never emerged. Randall's cultured persona, opera appreciation, and theatrical background fit stereotypes that made him vulnerable to assumption, regardless of truth. He focused relentlessly on his craft, avoiding personal discussions even in friendly interviews. Friends described someone deeply private who compartmentalized his life with unusual discipline. When he died in 2004, speculation persisted even in obituaries, demonstrating how assumption could outlive the person. Randall's story highlights the impossible position facing performers whose personalities defied rigid, masculine expectations. Whether the rumors reflected truth or projection, they reveal how Hollywood policed acceptable male presentation, punishing anyone who deviated from narrow standards. 11. Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb's sophisticated roles in films like Sitting Pretty defined mid-century elegance, his refined persona making him instantly recognizable. His close relationship with his mother, with whom he lived for decades, became tabloid fodder that coded his personal life in ways audiences understood without explicit statement. Webb never married, never publicly dated, and deflected personal questions with practiced skill. His career thrived in the 1940s and 50s, yet he remained hyper-aware of the precariousness of his position. Hollywood allowed certain performers to be confirmed bachelors, as long as they maintained plausible deniability. Webb's sophistication was acceptable entertainment, but explicit acknowledgement would have ended his career instantly. He died in 1966 with his private life, remaining exactly that, having successfully navigated 4 decades of Hollywood scrutiny. Webb's story demonstrates how class and sophistication sometimes provided protective cover, allowing wealthy performers more privacy than their less privileged counterparts. 12. Marjorie Main. Marjorie Main built her career playing Ma Kettle, the down-home matriarch in a series of successful films. Her wholesome image contrasted sharply with her private life, which she guarded fiercely from public scrutiny. Main was married briefly in her early career, but after her husband's death, she lived for decades with actress Spring Byington in an arrangement that sparked persistent speculation. The two women were inseparable professionally and personally, sharing homes and appearing together constantly. Hollywood's gossip machine churned with rumors, but Main's marketable maternal persona provided protective cover. Studios had invested heavily in her family-friendly image and worked to suppress speculation that might threaten box office returns. Main never addressed the rumors, maintaining strict boundaries between her public and private lives. When she died in 1975, her relationship with Byington was described euphemistically as a close friendship. Main's story reveals how female performers face similar pressures as their male counterparts, though the surveillance sometimes manifested differently. Her success depended on maintaining an image of traditional femininity that left no room for alternative family structures. 13. Agnes Moorehead. Agnes Moorehead's portrayal of Endora on Bewitched made her a television icon, her theatrical presence defining the character. Yet throughout her career, Moorehead faced persistent speculation about her personal life, rumors she found deeply hurtful and consistently denied. Her 2 brief marriages ended in divorce, and her later life included close friendships with women that attracted unwanted attention. Moorehead was a devout Presbyterian who viewed the rumors as attacks on her character and faith. The speculation caused her genuine distress, highlighting how assumption and innuendo damage people regardless of truth. Hollywood's rumor mill didn't distinguish between fact and fiction, treating speculation as guilty verdict. Moorehead's career spanned 5 decades, but she spent much of it defending her personal life rather than simply living it. When she died in 1974, the rumors persisted in obituaries, demonstrating how public perception could override an individual's own statements about their life. Moorehead's story complicates the narrative, showing how speculation itself became a weapon that harmed people independent of actual identity. 14. Liberace. Liberace's flamboyant stage persona made him one of entertainment's biggest stars, his sequined costumes and candelabras becoming instantly iconic. Yet, he maintained fierce denial of his sexuality, giving interviews about the women he might marry, even as he lived with male partners. His 1956 libel suit against a British newspaper that implied he was gay resulted in victory and substantial damages, reinforcing his public heterosexual image. Behind the scenes, Liberace carried on relationships with men throughout his career, most notably with Scott Thorson, who later sued him in a sensational palimony case. The contradiction between his obviously coded performance and his aggressive public denial created cognitive dissonance that audiences seemed willing to accept. Liberace's career depended on maintaining this impossible balance. His act perceived as campy entertainment, rather than authentic expression. When he died in 1987 from AIDS-related complications, his death certificate initially listed a different cause, extending the fiction even beyond life. The truth emerged quickly, but Liberace had spent his entire career prioritizing image over authenticity. 15. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift represented method acting's intensity, bringing raw emotion to films that redefined masculine performance. Though primarily a film actor with minimal television work, his influence on Hollywood's treatment of sexuality deserves acknowledgement. Clift's bisexuality was an open secret among Hollywood elite, yet publicly discussing it remained impossible. His relationships with both men and women, including close friendship with Elizabeth Taylor, demonstrated complexity that his era refused to accommodate. A devastating 1956 car accident left him physically scarred and emotionally traumatized, leading to addiction that studios exploited rather than addressed. Clift watched his career deteriorate as studios used his vulnerabilities against him while simultaneously profiting from his talent. He died in 1966 at just 45. His death hastened by the impossible pressures of living split between public expectation and private truth. Though not primarily a television performer, Clift's story illuminates the broader Hollywood system that sitcom actors navigated. 16. Peter Allen. Peter Allen's entertainment career centered on music and Broadway, rather than sitcoms. But his story connects to television through variety show appearances and his marriage to Liza Minnelli. The marriage lasted 7 years, widely understood as protective arrangement for both parties. Allen's flamboyance was acceptable on stage, his energetic performances celebrated, but explicit acknowledgement of his sexuality remained professionally dangerous. He continued performing throughout the 1970s and 80s, building a successful career while maintaining public silence about his personal life. Allen's songs, including I Go to Rio and Arthur's Theme, became international hits, yet interviews carefully avoided personal topics. When he died from AIDS-related complications in 1992, it forced posthumous acknowledgement of what had been an open secret. Allen's story demonstrates how musical performers faced similar pressures as actors, their careers dependent on maintaining acceptable public images. 17. Paul Winchell. Paul Winchell's ventriloquism made him a children's television star, his characters Jerry Mahoney and Knucklehead Smith becoming beloved fixtures. Behind the wholesome family entertainment lived someone navigating the same fears as his dramatic contemporaries. Winchell's 3 marriages and 6 children seemed to secure his family-friendly image, yet industry insiders whispered about tensions between public persona and private reality. The pressure facing children's entertainers was particularly intense, their marketability depending entirely on parental trust and wholesome image. Any suggestion of deviation from acceptable norms could destroy not just an individual career, but damage an entire genre. Winchell remained vigilant throughout his decades-long career, maintaining strict boundaries between his public and private worlds. His work extended beyond entertainment into medical innovation, inventing an early artificial heart, demonstrating a mind that refused confinement to expected roles. When he died in 2005, his legacy focused on entertainment and invention, with personal complexities remaining largely unexplored. 17 performers, 17 different strategies for survival in an industry built on impossible choices. Some found late-life freedom, others carried silence to their graves. and a few became accidental activists when exposure arrived uninvited. Their stories aren't about scandal, but about the exhausting cost of fame in an era that demanded you erase yourself to succeed. Which of these stories surprised you most? Do you think Hollywood has genuinely changed, or have the constraints simply evolved? Drop your thoughts below, because these conversations matter as much now as they did then.